Welcome to Healing Echoes. Today we have with us Ivy. Hi, Ivy.
Hi.
I would love to start with you just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you.
Okay, so I'm Ivy. Um, right now I am a mental health coach. Um, I've been through a lot in my life that's led me here. Um, it started with anxiety at a really young age. I had my first panic attack before I was even 5 years old.
Mm,
Um, and those just kind of continued for as long as I could remember. My
right.
mom took me to therapists. We tried medication. And even at one point in my life, I was taking a high dose medication 3 times a day, every day, and I was still having panic attacks.
Wow.
And then I was diagnosed with depression in my preteens,
Mm,
possibly like 12, 11, 12. Um, and again, therapy and medication. And it's hard to even call it a band-aid
hmm
because it wasn't really doing anything besides making me hyper vigilant over my body, trying to see if I was having, like negative side effects and stuff.
Right.
Because that's what they tell you to do, take it, let us know
Mhm.
if you notice anything. Um, so that went on forever. Because I'll be 28 this year.
Mm,
Um, so whenever I was 25, I got pregnant with my daughter. And at the time, I thought I had like my stuff together. I thought I was doing pretty well mentally. Um, and then pregnancy was really hard. I ended up quitting my job at like 20 weeks pregnant
wow.
because I was like a mess every day. I was having anxiety waking up, going into work, at work, and I was a nanny at the time and it wasn't healthy for me or the kiddos. And unfortunately I had to walk away.
Yeah.
Um, so then I had my baby and it was like the first, I don't know, a few days, everything was like perfect. You
hmm
know, it was like she was sleeping well, she was eating well.
Yeah.
She had some jaundice, so we were in the hospital a little longer, but everything was like so perfect. And then I feel like it was on that 7 day mark, everything like crashed down
Mm.
like hard. And that first year of my kiddo's life was probably the absolute hardest.
Mm.
Postpartum depression and anxiety during a pandemic.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
while being stuck at home when I've been working since I was before I was even 15. I mean I've worked for family
Right.
babysitting. I would help out at their little work from home jobs,
Right.
like some under the table stuff. Like I've always worked, and I was like stuck at home not working, terrible anxiety, terrible depression.
Mm.
And so I reached out to my doctor and I was like, who's your therapist? Because I need help, like
Right.
like bad.
Yeah.
Um, I was institutionalized, which is great. That was a pat on my back there. I kept myself out of there. No offense to anybody who was, stuff happens.
Yeah.
Um, but shortly after speaking to my therapist, now
hmm
she diagnosed me with PTSD and ADHD as well.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and actually, to backtrack a little bit, whenever I was somewhere in my early 20s, I reached out to a therapist again because I've just always wanted to get things in check.
Right.
Um, because they just never were. And so I reached out to another therapist, and he actually diagnosed me with bipolar.
I remember talking about.
Yeah, the lower grade one, I'm not familiar with like the difference between one and two, besides that they're different. But I
Right.
had the like lower grade one. I didn't have very high episodes or anything, which now with the anxiety and well with
hmm
the PTSD and ADHD, it makes sense. Like that was just a misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
But I was medicated for that and everything, and nothing was getting better,
Oh my
you know?
goodness. Yeah.
So it was like a doom. Like,
Yeah, because you're being medicated for something you don't even have.
yeah,
But you think you do. So when it's not
yeah,
working, you're like, what is going on?
yeah. It was a mess. And
Oh
then
my goodness.
whenever I had my daughter, I decided to breastfeed.
hmm
So I thought that there was like no medication allowed on that, besides my depression medicine that was allowed. Um, but other than that, I was like, I have all these issues. I can't be medicated, and it was just really bad. So I reached out to a therapist and she diagnosed me with PTSD and ADHD. And then we started looking for coping mechanisms rather
Mhm.
than medications.
Right.
And that was a first for me. Anytime I went to a doctor, it was always like that first appointment, I
Mm.
was prescribed something.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything else that was tried. So I was like, okay. And she taught me like journaling, which was, it seemed silly at first,
Mm.
but it worked.
Yeah.
We did like coloring. That was something that really helped me.
Mhm.
Having like a creative outlet on like social media and stuff, that was really helpful. Like just being able to have somebody that I was really open with, and who could handle the things that I was talking about. Because the guy that diagnosed me with bipolar,
Right.
um, I was trying to get a PTSD diagnosis at the time because I was wanting to try another form of medication. I'm not sure. Are you open with marijuana talk on here?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to get medical marijuana because I heard it was so helpful for PTSD. And I also have chronic pain in my back.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had the chronic pain diagnosis from my doctor, which had me covered, but I was like, let's go ahead and get this covered by my therapist as well. And he was like, what did you go through where you could have PTSD? And I was like, well, I mean, there's kind of a lot, but I had one instance in general, um, well, one instance in particular
Mhm.
that really hindered me a lot and affected like my outlook on life. And
Mm.
I mean, it hindered my life. Um,
Yeah.
and he was like, well, let's talk about that. I was like, okay. Um, and we start getting into detail. And it wasn't even that deep, really. Like, it was just kind of the
Yeah.
beginning of the scenario. And he's like, okay, I don't need to hear anymore. That's enough. That's a little graphic. Um, and I was like, okay. And he knew I was getting the PTSD diagnosis like on paper because I wanted to try medical marijuana.
Mhm.
And he was very clear that he did not like that idea and thought that it could worsen it. So he then told me that my traumatic event was not traumatic enough to be diagnosed with PTSD. The same man who couldn't handle my story.
What you were saying. Oh goodness. I
So
can't.
that was my last appointment with him.
Yeah, well
Um,
good.
I never went back. Um, I ended up stopping my bipolar meds.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, and that a few years went by. I had my baby, everything else. I
Mhm.
told my current therapist that whole situation of him not even being able to handle it. And she went over everything in detail that happened,
Yeah.
including my intrusive thoughts, helped me reframe them, because I was the type of person who was asked, well, what were you wearing? Um, and that stuck with me a lot, in particular, what I was wearing, which was because I was sexually assaulted. And at the time, I was wearing my Predators soccer jersey.
Mhm.
And, you know, men love to see women in their uniforms.
Feels like ownership.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And so I was like, that's my fault. I knew that. I should have never done that. And so my therapist really helped me work through that.
Mhm.
And then there's a lot of other stuff that she helped me work through with that entire situation as well. But
Mhm.
she diagnosed me.
Yeah. Mhm.
And before
Properly.
her, yeah, before her, I was able to go ahead and start the medical marijuana for my chronic pain.
Yeah.
And then I briefly told my medical marijuana doctor what happened, that I think would qualify me for the PTSD. And he was like, oh, absolutely, no question about it.
Yep.
Don't worry about a therapist approval. Like, anybody will sign this off.
Yeah.
And I was like,
It's
okay, that's
traumatic.
fine. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, so I had my therapist and we worked through everything. And now, because whenever I first started seeing her, I was seeing her twice a week.
Right.
She was like, this is pretty serious. Let's see you twice a week. And then we winged off to once a week and then every other week. And now we just kind of touch base once a month.
That's nice.
Um, but the entire time, well, I'd say several months after I got healing, not the entire time,
Mhm.
she kept telling me, like, you should do something with your story.
Mhm.
You would make a really great life coach. You're so inspiring. And
Yeah.
um, I'm always helping other people. And, like I was just being an inspirational person. And she was like, you should use that. Like, you really need to find a way to do that. But I've always been ashamed of
Mm,
my story. And then also the feeling of people have it worse.
yeah.
Like your childhood and your traumas aren't nearly as bad as some people's.
Yeah.
And which is true. There are people who have been through worse things, but there's also a lot of people that have been through my exact thing and who are going through the exact feelings and everything else. And it's inspirational to them.
Yeah.
Um, so I decided that I was going to be like an influencer for self care and self love. I was like, this is great. That it's what I'm going to do. And to make money from it, I was like, I'm going to, join some affiliate links and
Right.
just, do that kind of stuff. But it felt so weird. Like I was setting up my email list and I was posting on social media and everything. I don't know. It just seemed so odd. And so I was like, well, maybe I'm not just, you know, influencer. Maybe I'm more of like a coach.
Mm.
Um, I love Cameron Rosin. I talk about him all the time. I feel like
Mhm.
it's too much, but he's been such an inspiration to me. But he has a podcast, and so I was like, well, and my therapist even was like, you should try a podcast and stuff. Um, and then I seen like he was also a coach, and I was like, so you can do this. Like you can take your experiences
Yeah.
and you could help other people and you could podcast. I didn't realize how easy it was to podcast.
Yeah, it's a lot easier than people think.
Yeah. So it was just kind of like this door opened up and I walked through it.
Yeah.
um
Awesome.
yeah, and so I just been through a lot.
Yeah.
And my kind of analogy is I found myself at the bottom of this really deep dark hole.
Mhm.
And I decided to climb my way out. And as I was climbing out, I discovered all these amazing tools.
Yeah.
And now I just want to share my tools with other people. I know it helped me, and I want to help others now. So that's me.
It's beautiful. I think there's actually a lot more of us, people that either podcast or coach or authors or whatever. The majority of them are people that have went through it because that's why
Hmm.
they do it. It's like the
Yes.
inspiration behind it. They don't just want to help people, which is good enough all on its own, but they've been there and that's their drive behind, helping people, which I
Hmm.
love because I kind of relate to you in the sense of thinking like, well, I'll just do this little bit because I'm not gonna do that. Like, who am I to do that? And
Yeah.
well, I'm the perfect person to do that,
Hmm.
and so are you. And the wanting to compare, I mean, because I've been through people that have heard my story in full and not just like the blanket statements that I give for all of the different types of trauma that I've been in. First off, they never imagine it. They're like, there's no way.
Hmm.
But then it is the, well, oh my God, why was I just complaining to you when you've been through all these things? I guess in some senses there is a like worse thing or a less thing, but my like saying that I always stress to people is that we can hold space for all trauma and all abuse and all just tough situations without
Hmm.
having to compare them.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to trauma. I know we've talked about that before because, what might be traumatic to one person isn't to another. Um,
Hmm.
so I always think that's really important. And I think
Okay.
your story in particular it really points out the importance of a couple different things. But the one that sticks out to me the most is how important it is to find the care, be it a medical professional or a mental health professional, that is right for you.
Yes.
Because a lot of times you get assigned to one that just ain't doing it. And it's like,
For
no.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
especially, and then the other one is like how important it is to find the right sort of treatment because
Mhm.
medications do work for some people, or, it's worth the try. But especially, I feel like when you start in the medical profession and you don't go straight to a mental health professional, their go-to, the medical professionals, is always medication.
Always.
Not, well, let's get you to a therapist and see what they recommend. It's like,
Yeah.
well, until you get there, here's some pills, take these.
Mhm.
Like, they did
Well,
the
for the
same
longest
thing to
time,
me.
I
Yeah.
wasn't even referred.
Yeah.
Like my general practitioner, and at multiple times, it was just a nurse practitioner,
Yeah.
not even an actual PhD,
Yeah.
just giving me anxiety and depression meds and not sending me to a
Yeah, and
therapist.
I hate to be that person, and some people might not like that because there is an interconnectedness. But if you've not studied anything to do with the mind, you really shouldn't be treating the disorders of it.
No, it's outside of your scope of practice. And
You
even
don't
as an
know.
SPNA, like I
Yeah,
learned to
like you
read the
don't
body.
know anything about it. You don't know how it works. You're just like, oh, well,
Mm-mm.
it says it treats anxiety, so here you go.
Yep. Like, oh, you're having anxiety. Here you go. Yep.
Yeah, no, it just doesn't
Yeah.
work like that. And unfortunately, it's really not even a here you go until you can get into a therapist because a lot of anxiety and even depression meds, they don't even fully take effect until you've been taking them for a month and a half, like
Hmm.
6 weeks. So I'm like, it's not even a quick fix.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to immediately help
Therapy can
me
be a
do
lot
better
quicker.
getting me into a therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and then I know when me and you have talked one-on-one, we had talked about the bipolar misdiagnosis that happens a lot.
Hmm.
And the more women that I've interviewed, the more I see that come up. One of the connects that I made, we're actually really good friends now too. Her name is Catherine Annis. She was misdiagnosed with bipolar at like 13 and medicated for years for
Wow.
something she didn't have. She never had it. She finally went to a doctor that looked at like 10 plus years worth of medical records, and he was like, I don't see anywhere in here where you have bipolar. But she'd
Wow.
been medicated for it because her mom took her to a doctor and was like, she's bipolar. So they just started medicating her. I'm like, oh my God. Um,
Wow.
yeah, but especially with neurodivergent women, it commonly is misconceived as being bipolar because we don't
Yeah.
articulate the way they want us to. And that was my thing. I have CPTSD and I'm ADHD. So it was like, well,
Yeah.
her emotions are doing this and she doesn't process them properly. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh,
And it's crazy because bipolar is known for having its like set, like manic and set, like
hmm
depressive episodes. And I was very, very open for like my entire life
hmm
that I can go through all my emotions within a span of a few hours.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter like what mindset I'm in. If something makes me happy, it makes me happy. If it makes me sad, it makes me sad.
Yeah, you can feel the
But
full range.
yeah, but if you're bipolar, like if you're manic, you're manic. Nothing's going to bring you down. And and I've seen that my mother has bipolar, and
hmm
I think she's accurately diagnosed.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've seen that people can be so sad and nothing can
Nothing
make them
else.
happy.
Yeah.
Nothing can change that around. And I was so confused when I got my bipolar diagnosis. And but he was a professional. He's been doing this for years. He's
That's what a lot of people, that's how they feel. So
yeah,
they just go with it.
yeah. So but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, we're
I've seen
taught
him.
from birth really to trust the professionals, to not
Always.
question them. And that's another thing that I talk a lot about, especially as someone who has dealt a lot with the medical profession because I have chronic illnesses and have been
Hmm.
gaslit and treated with misogyny my whole life,
Yeah, same.
especially with trying to get treatment, but also in the mental health professions and kind of having the same kind of issues. I always tell people, advocate for yourself, get a
Yeah,
second, get a third opinion. Don't just trust them because they're the professional, because there's
yeah,
always room for human error. Make sure that you're getting the best treatment. And if your gut is telling you, listen to your gut. It's
absolutely.
better than any kind of degree you could get in a school.
Yeah.
Trust me.
And you
You'll
know
find,
yourself so much better than they do.
yeah, and you will find the good ones out there, obviously. But if you're getting treatment and you're like, this isn't right, or this isn't, they should be trying harder for me,
Hmm.
advocate for yourself,
Yep.
please. It took me so long to do it for myself. I wish I had done it sooner.
there's areas in my life that I definitely need to do it because I
Yeah,
know you said, your medical like issues. I've had hypothyroidism, and then it's turned into Hashimoto's, since I was at 13, I think, and
yeah,
my like TSH was 43, which
yeah,
is insanely high. They start treating it just like half a number up,
right.
and mine was 43 times that.
Yeah,
Um, and like to this day I'm just on like a synthetic hormone,
yeah.
and through my podcasting I've talked to functional medicine practitioners,
Mhm.
and so many have told me like, no, that's a problem with your liver, and I'm like, this has never been discussed,
Mm-mm.
never.
Yeah, I'm hoping. So through my podcast, I talk to a lot of different people. Like your message earlier that was like, you have all the connects. This is why.
Hmm.
It's opened a lot of doors for me. And
Yeah.
I hope because of the people that I've met, that even in just the medical field, there will start being more knowledge and less ignorance and less just
Hmm.
lack of knowledge. But I think unfortunately, that's a huge part of why there's such misdiagnoses and lack of treatment, and still just the misogyny, unfortunately,
Hmm.
a lot of it. We do live in a patriarchy.
Yeah.
Um, because there's just so much that you're like, why wouldn't you question that more? Why wouldn't you run all the tests? They run
Yep.
one and they're like, well, here's your answers. And but I've talked to so many different types of professionals now that I'm hoping that as they come in and they're kind of taking over, that the treatment for people in all the
Hmm.
different ways will start to improve so that things like this don't have to continue for generations because
Oh,
obviously it's happened for far too long.
far too long.
Far
I mean,
too long. Yeah.
it's still going on. I know you mentioned like misogyny.
Mhm.
I've always had male doctors growing up. Now I have all women,
Yep.
and not, I mean, it's kind of a preference just because it's like they get it more than a man does. Whenever I was first diagnosed, well, a few years after I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, um, I had gained around 100 pounds in a year,
Mhm.
and I was like 15, 16 years old. Um,
It's
I,
like
my memory is not the greatest, so my numbers may be a little off here and there, but it was in my teens.
right.
Um, and so my doctor's like, "What is going on? Why are you gaining all this weight? Like, you're obviously eating too much and not working out enough."
That could
Meanwhile,
be the
I
only thing.
yeah, meanwhile, I have an eating disorder that he doesn't know about where I'm barely eating,
Yeah.
and I'm working out as like a child who has like no one around me worked out. So I'm like doing it all by myself.
Yeah.
And he's like, you need to try the Weight Watchers free trial and learn what you can through that free trial and apply it.
Wow.
That was his advice to me
Yeah.
as a teenager who gained over 100 pounds in a year. No other tests were
Yeah,
done.
not this is a huge red flag. We need to see what's going on internally. Just here's a
Hmm.
diet plan, which any good doctor will know that dieting isn't actually good for you. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
another podcast.
Right. Well, I've had podcasts on it too about food freedom, and you
Yeah,
listen to it, you're
I
like,
listened to
yes,
that one. It was huge for me. Yeah.
like, yeah, it was huge for me too. I'm like,
Yeah.
listen,
I
once
mean,
this money starts flowing in, there's people I gotta talk to.
you're like, listen, yeah,
Yeah.
because I have PCOS, so I had the weight issues
Mm.
that were not from eating bad and not working out. I
Yeah.
grew up on a farm, so we got up at 4:30 to start doing physical activities. I was in soccer, like I was a very active child, but
Hmm.
around 13, 14, I just started putting on the weight and I couldn't get it off.
Hmm.
Um, and similar happened to me. I remember like this one time being weighed and they came back with a BMI
Hmm.
and they diagnosed me as morbidly obese at
Hmm.
14. And seeing that word morbid and knowing what its technical definition is, and
Yeah.
knowing that when you're morbidly obese, it's supposed to negatively impact your day-to-day activities, and I was perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Like, how am I morbidly obese? Like, it was just something that my mind focused on, especially already having really bad self-esteem. And it took years to get a diagnosis. I still, when I have a new primary that I have to go see next week, and I know I'm gonna have to be like, here's the facts. Here's what I know I have.
Hmm.
Don't try to tell me otherwise. I know my body because it's just such a pain. And even though they're a primary medical doctor, you have to go through all of your, your anxiety and depression and all that with them too. So it's like,
Yep.
here's all my things. But I
Those
am,
first visits are always hard.
they
Sorry.
are, I'm not looking forward to it.
You poor thing.
Yeah, because of moving, I had to switch. I'm like, oh God, here we go again.
Mm,
But I'm glad that I'm at a point where like knowing that I have to advocate for myself is
yeah.
something that I can do with confidence. And I'm glad that even though you had to go through all of these crappy treatments and misdiagnosis, you finally got to one that was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
yes, I will listen and I'll listen to the incidents that happened and I'll listen to them in detail because it's literally my fucking job. And I
Yeah.
won't make you be quiet.
Yeah.
Like when you told me that the first time that he told you to stop, I was like, oh no.
And it was like nothing. I with that therapist,
I didn't want to hear from you.
I never fully got through that story with him ever. And
Mm-mm.
it was even the bad part, you
Makes me
know?
angry.
Yeah. Yep. I'm pretty sure he's like still practicing and
Probably
maybe I
has,
should
unfortunately, and still
yeah.
be silencing people,
It's
unfortunately.
crazy. It's crazy. So,
But I am really glad that all of the things, not that you went through them, but that they led you to a point where you realized that you could help other people.
mhm.
Just from the first time we connected, you shine. It's very
You
clear.
do too. You
Thank
do
you.
too.
I was like, oh my goodness, I have to connect with this person.
Yeah.
She's so both
Me
of
and you
us.
clicked instantly.
I love it. Those connections they're really important,
They
especially
are.
when you've been through things.
Yeah.
Um, so in wrapping up, is there anything else you want to say, words of encouragement, and then how people can contact you?
Words of encouragement. You are not alone. There are people out there willing to listen. There are people out there who are going to validate your feelings and not push you to the side. Um, you're relatable. No matter what you've been through, no matter how unique it might seem, you are relatable. And there is somebody out there who's not going to push you away for that. Um, and to get in contact with me, you can find me pretty much everywhere under Gentle Growth with Ivy. I'm very active on Instagram. That's where I like to post the most.
Mhm.
And I'm also on Spotify and YouTube. That's where you can find my podcast. It's also Gentle Growth with Ivy. If you're interested in booking a session or anything, you can go to gentlegrowthwithivy.com. And I do offer free consultations or free discovery calls. I like that word. I kind of stole that from you. So, but I like the discovery call more than the consultation. But yeah, I love talking to people and I post content daily. I try to. Yeah, I'm just very big mental health advocate and education person.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I will
Thank
make
you.
sure that I link all of those in the show notes because I know people prefer to just click than
Like
have
it.
to
Yeah, I
search.
appreciate that.
But I appreciate you coming on and chatting with
Thank
us.
you.
I'm definitely gonna have you on again.
Hey, yep, you're more than welcome on mine again too. So I love
Awesome.
chatting with you and we'll be in contact. So
Definitely.
all right. Well, thank you.